Hi, welcome here to Stanley Park, Shibuya Republic, the man. The man behind Shibuya Republic, yeah, I've had it for a lot of years and it's a lot of fun. And today's video is an odd video because I've been thinking about, I was listening to a lot of some Japanese pop music yesterday from the 1990s. There's some beautiful magnolia trees here in Stanley Park. And I was listening to that music, and uh, I had a chance to, or I've been just sort of reflecting on what life was like living in the Heisei period of Japan, which is from the mid 1990s until I guess about 2020. And right now, I guess it's the fifth year. It's going to be the fifth year of the Reiwa age, but which I lived in, but I lived in Japan in the Heisei time, and in the mid 1990s, I can remember that the communication was nowhere near like it is today. But we had the sort of like the internet was sort of like starting to take shape, and then people had emails and everything, and there would be some sort of, there was like this really almost this ancient internet was starting to take place and I lived in Tokyo, and there was internet cafes, and the beginning of the sort of the internet broadband age that we live in now was starting to take place then. But it was Japan was still was much more isolated, I think, than it is now today. I feel like even here, I live in Vancouver, I have contact with Tokyo and through Instagrams, and I can feel like I'm almost there. And in the 1990s, at the beginning of the Heisei period, it was definitely a more isolated period. And I was told by everyone that Japan was going through this economic collapse at the time, and I just had no conscience of it. And I think that's really aided me through my life. That everyone's like the economy's bad, or there's going to be some sort of recession or depression. Yeah, I've never really paid attention to that. So for good reason or bad reason, I just never paid attention to it. So like I'm sure that there were like Japanese families or Japanese businesses who had, for example, invested in Japanese, let's say, securities or stocks and real estate during the bubble when it was crashing. That's a really important backdrop for the, so you have the Showa period boom after World War II. Totally unnecessary war in my estimation. And then you have the bull run from after basically the 1950s, 60s, and 70s into the final stages of the 80s and the blow off top. And as the bubble burst and blew apart, the Japanese financial system was kind of held together. Not in anything different that's done right here during the collapse of like the world economic financial system, which is like falling down in chunks right now, and basically all my lifetime since 1971 and Richard Nixon. There was a lot of fun things coming back to the topic at hand here, but that's a little the backdrop of, I guess, that I didn't know at the time, but as you get older, you just get smarter and more wise to what's really going on in the world. That would sort of be the economic backdrop. And I think that economic sort of punch in the gut that the Japanese were taking at the time might have actually made it easier for a foreign or white person like me to live in Japan. Maybe the real estate realities of making your real estate. There was still a lot of prejudice in sort of like securing housing and stuff like that, which has always pushed me toward why I bought my first apartment there in the late 1990s. So that was like, even a little bit that's still there today. I'm not sure if it's a xenophobic thing or just like a language barrier thing. But that was always a challenge for people to secure a decent place to live. And I lived in like what was called a gaijin house, but it was just a share house, and you still see these share houses today. And I had a roommate in the share house. His name was Kurt, and we got along really great. But my company I worked for, just an English school, and when they got an apartment for me, I took it right away. I was like, yeah, I'll take it. Communal living was really not for me. I liked having my own place. During the first 10 years of the Heisei time, I think that foreign people, we had a lot of freedom. I was doing a lot of backpacking in Asia, and all we needed was our passport, and we all didn't know how long we were going to end up staying in Japan. Sometimes we didn't know. So I can remember like not really paying any taxes for the first 2 or 3 years as I moved around from shitty apartment to shitty apartment. And then as I became more serious, when I was studying more Japanese and I was getting more proficient at the language, that I thought that it would be a great place for me to have a teaching career, which it was. I worked for 2 private high schools over about 15 years, and all the way I'd been putting together my Tokyo company that I still have. And there was a lot of like, we had a lot of freedom and stuff, but we definitely were isolated from the Western world. I have like a blank, like I love to, like I was a football player, and I like to follow the NFL, and I have a bunch of, like a good 10-year period where I didn't really know much of the great NFL players of that period, from about 1995 to 2006, and then when broadband came, I began to receive more cultural information. But yeah, my main media source at the time would have been like the Japan Times, the English daily morning newspaper, and at nighttime the Yomiuri or the Asahi had a night English paper, and American Forces Radio, Eagle 810 was my outlet, and then they would broadcast all sorts of, I guess they had NPR, but they had a whole bunch of stuff. They would broadcast like left-leaning, like NPR stuff, and at the same, like they had, I think, Rush Limbaugh on at the time. So there was like Eagle 810 was my sort of English outlet that I really liked, and I'm into fitness just like I'm walking right now. So even when I would go for a walk, I would have my little AM radio with my earphones, and I'd listen to Eagle 810. It was great. And then one time on the train, I met a girl who she'd worked for Eagle 810, and I mentioned to her on the train how much it was, I appreciated it. Yeah, so that was kind of we had a lot of freedom in those years. And over my lifetime, I've just seen, like, in the 30 years that I was there in Asia, now back here in Canada, I just seen the restrictions and everything. Like, you could have bank accounts in different countries and stuff like that. And it wasn't considered like money laundering. I guess there must have been some money laundering done and stuff like that, of course. But like, you're just going somewhere. You thought that you could open a bank account there because you might you'd been backpacking there or living, or you thought maybe you'd like to go live there or something like that. So we definitely had a lot more freedoms in that way. And I think, like, Japanese society there was still a lot of the management in the schools that I worked in at the time. The first school was in Shinagawa. His name was Seiryo Shukoto Gakko. The management in a school like that had come out of the Showa period, and their experience with dealing with foreign people was very, very strict. and I worked there in the late 90s into the 2000s, and then in 2006 I got a new job with another private school called Yokohama Soe, and in that 10 years time, the change in the management, you'd seen like a much more, I don't know, when you use the word tolerant, I don't want to say it, like there's just that sort of like the second school, Yokohama Soe, that I worked at was just much more easier to work for as a foreign person, where the first school that I worked at I felt was more difficult because the management had been imbued or had this sort of post-war push toward victory through commerce, like after the war, which is really no fault of them. I mean, because all the talking points and all the sort of cultural brainwashing that they had, that's what they had received, like in the time after the war. And I met my wife now in the I guess 2005 I first met her, and we were married pretty quickly after that. And I got the what's known as the Heisei or the lifetime visa, which I still have for Japan. And I can remember, like, I did all the paperwork for it, but I didn't see any real sort of hard challenges to it. Like, it just took maybe it took about 10 months for it to get, but I eventually got it. And along the way too, I got my Japanese level up very high, or not very high, like at a really good level in the proficiency test. And I found the proficiency test, which is called the Nihongo Noryoku Shiken, I found that a very good system. But that's in the years past that time, the test used to be once a year, and then people's career was so, I mean, it was such a high, when people were like, to have that test once a year was really unfair in a lot of ways, and that's why it's now twice a year, because it's a much more forgiving test, in that once you get up to the final two levels, if you only given a shot once a year and you just come up short, you're facing a whole nother year of studying. Whereas now, if you come up a little short, the window toward the next test is only 6 months. Yeah, so I really, and then I guess there was a lot of opportunity as well in the Heisei time to get involved in real estate, because the air from the real estate bubble of the 1980s and the 90s was all coming out, and I was purchasing properties then, and I didn't really have a consciousness of it. I would just travel around the world and I'd see a great neighborhood and I'd come back to Tokyo, and I lived in Shibuya, and I'd think, geez, Shibuya's got like it's not anything less than this neighborhood I visited in Vancouver, for example, Kitsilano. I'd be like, oh, Meguro is just as nice as that. I wonder why the price is twice as cheap. So I had that kind of like, I was always like a backpacker with a hostel on, and I always was looking for opportunity. And I thought that when I looked at the prices, the lifestyle, what you would squeeze out of a lifestyle and let's say a professional life, I thought that Tokyo offered a lot for buying an apartment. Like, you got a lot for your money, is what I thought, in comparison to other places. So I guess like the fact that Japan was sort of tucked away, and the communication in terms of the internet and information, let's say for example in the Japanese real estate space, was not accessible to many other foreign people, gave me a certain advantage that I probably didn't even know about at the time. I just was living my life and looking for opportunity. I did get into like one of the first private school that I worked at. I worked with this one guy, a Canadian teacher, who was a very, very militant man, and he was trying to bring a union in to the school, and created almost like a really war. And I was like, I ended up like I was always a person who like I was pretty diligent in my job. Like I was very aware with what my employers were expecting of me, and like always trying to deliver it. And that sort of war that happened in the apartment, like our department, left me really nervous. I like felt like I could be just well anything anywhere. You feel you can really just be fired any day, but that sort of stress really drove me. That sort of like I can remember I wasn't even sleeping well, and that awoke like the shadow in me. Everyone has a shadow. In that, I knew that I needed to put together like my own company or an asset, like an asset holding company, so that I like working, but I don't like. I felt like I was being taken advantage of. Not actually like I actually empathize. I'm not a person. I empathize with both sides. I think that like the guy who was trying to start the union, I think that he had some decent diligent points, but I think that also he was also at heart a very lazy person, and like he was seeking conflict with like Japanese leadership within the school, and they weren't going to take any of it more. And then I just was kind of left in the middle of it, and I wasn't going to have any more of that. Like, oh, I was going to continue, but at the same time, I was going to build my own company so that I didn't have to deal with this sort of unreasonable stress. Like, yeah, I could always walk away from the situation that was that I thought was unfair. So yeah, I mean, I tried to use that shadow or that stress as a motivating force to start my own company. Anyhow, I think that the Heisei time was great. I had for as much as I was told that the the economy was falling down, I never felt like that in Tokyo. I always felt that like it was totally booming uh, in my eyes. So, and I thought it was a fun place. And some of the dangers of Japan is if you find it a danger or not. But like there's when you're involved, even like private schools, like I was involved in, or in the weekends I was involved in the wedding business. There's just a lot of drinking that goes on in Japanese culture. So and particularly business culture. So the idea of like, I mean, by North American standards, I would think that everyone is like, not everyone, but like a large percentage of the Tokyo population, yeah, are totally alcoholics. So yeah, there's definitely alcohol danger, and then I know that some of the people that were like, for example, in the banking industry, I know that they were doing cocaine, and there was drugs in Tokyo, but much less than is the case here, for example, in Vancouver. Anyhow, the wind is going to pick up here, but this is one, and we just talk about living the little bit of historical reflection. I don't know if it could be historical because like it is a little bit too recent for it to be historical, but some reflections on the Heisei age and what it was like to live in Tokyo then. Okay, bye bye from Shibuya Republic, now in Vancouver.